Hi, this is Steve Rigolosi, and tonight on Forgotten Mysteries, I have for you a writer who is, I think, mostly forgotten, and his name is Bart Spicer, and the book we are reviewing tonight is The Golden Door. This is copyright 1951 by Dodd and Mead. This is a book club edition, kind of not in the best shape, but a funny story about this book. It came as part of a lot. I was looking to find myself a copy of Ursula Curtis's book, Out of the Dark. This one right here. And I'm a huge fan of Ursula Curtis, and this book is really hard to find. And I found it for sale on eBay as a lot with two other books. And the price was so reasonable, I thought, I'll get the book that I crave, and then I'll get two books by people I had not read before, one being Bart Spicer and the other being Gavin Black. And I really liked the Gavin Black book. In fact, I'm going to read more and review for you on here. And I thought, well, why not try Bart Spicer at the same time? Because it sounded like this person who was selling books on eBay had pretty good taste. It's a book club edition, so, they're never, quite as beautifully packaged as the publisher's editions. But I will show you something interesting, which is that they use a second color on the title page, which is sort of, I think by today's standards would be considered sort of surprising, because when you use a second color ink other than black, that raises the price of your what we call in the industry PPB, paper printing and binding. So, these days things are done so cheaply and on such cheap paper that it's kind of nice to see even a book club edition got a little bit of extra, oomph there in terms of that second color ink. Also notice though that there's nothing on the back flap, which sometimes when books made the transition from a publisher's edition to a book club edition, they left stuff off the back flap, which to me is just wasted real estate. But they did give us a nice photo here of Mr. Spicer himself. Looks like rather a lanky gentleman, of course, with the cigarette in his mouth, as was the style at the time. And so, yeah, this is it. This is The Golden Door by Bart Spicer. And The Golden Door refers to the Emma Lazarus poem on the Statue of Liberty, I Lift My Lamp Beside the Golden Door. And it actually, that poem actually has a lot of relevance to this book, and it's one of the reasons why I'm reviewing it here, mostly because of the theme, which I find very, very relevant, and not so much because I thought the book was great. The book was okay. It was an okay read. It's not something I would rave about, but there were enough interesting things to talk about, and this is the Forgotten Mysteries channel, so, why not just have a little fun with it? So, a little bit about the author. His real name was Albert Samuel Spicer, but he wrote under the name Bart Spicer. He had served in the American military, and then when he got sent home, he began a career in radio journalism, and from there went on to become a writer. Wrote under several pseudonyms, wrote some books with his wife, and probably the height of his success was that his first novel, published in 1949, called The Dark Light, was nominated for an Edgar for Best First Novel. It didn't win, but it was nominated. So Spicer was noticed by the mystery establishment at that time in the late 40s. But I don't think that the books really, I don't think the books got a lot of contemporary attention back in the day and have kind of fallen by the wayside now. So let me tell you a little bit about the book, the plot, the setting, and then you can decide whether you think it would be a good read for you. So Spicer's lead character, his series character, is named Carney Wilde, and he's a 30-year-old guy who is a private investigator, and he is fortunate to have a contract as kind of the store dick or the store investigator for a very large department store in Philadelphia. And, he is there to do what they call, loss prevention, which means, arrest shoplifters and keep an eye on things and make sure nothing screwy is going on. He just does that part-time on sort of an ad hoc basis. At the same time, he's trying to grow and expand his own business as a detective because he's got dreams, he's got aspirations. He wants to own a big detective agency and be successful. And that was something about the book that appealed to me. It brought me back to my early days in my 20s and my early 30s, where I was really I really wanted to be a great editor. I wanted to learn my trade and learn the tricks and get the experience and just become a really good editor and move on to becoming a senior editor and a publisher someday. And I remember the excitement of those days, when you're really anxious to learn something that you feel is kind of your career destiny or what you really want to do. My early jobs in publishing, every day was an adventure. And even though they weren't always fun and they were sometimes filled with drudgery and crazy managers, I love those days, and I learned, what I know and use now. So that appealed to me about Carney Wilde, his ambition. At the same time, he's 30 years old and still learning, so he doesn't quite have it down. He doesn't have the smoothness or the slickness that a more seasoned detective would have. So just for example, before reading this book, I had read one of Bill Pronzini's Nameless books, book in his Nameless series. And I'm a real fan of Pronzini. I can't review him on here because he's still alive, which is a good thing, which means we'll get more books from him. But, reading the Nameless books, I'm always sort of struck in a subtle way at just how professional Nameless is in the way he goes about his business. He is an utter pro. He knows how to follow leads and track down suspects and interrogate people. And it's all done just with this sense of utter competence that only comes when you've been doing a job for a while. And I think in the book that I just finished, Nameless is in his mid-50s, right? So he's no kid anymore, which means he doesn't have the energy, and maybe he's put on a few pounds, but he's got the benefit of experience. And Carney is still learning his trade. And you see that in the book, in that he doesn't always think before he speaks. He's rather rudely confrontational sometimes when there's no need to be. He hasn't yet learned that you can catch more flies with honey, and that there's more than one way to investigate successfully than just, getting in somebody's face or, throwing a punch or making a threat. He's got that kind of testosterone-fueled young man air about him, which I guess we'll see in later books. Not that I plan to read them, whether he mellows as he gains experience. So Carney is a likable character in a lot of ways, but still kind of being formed, still a work in progress, and sometimes a little annoying for that reason, but basically a likable guy. Another nice thing about this book that I enjoyed was the setting, which is Philadelphia. There's not a lot of mysteries set in Philly, not nearly as many as set in New York or San Francisco or Chicago. And so it was nice to see another American city as a setting. The setting is realized decently. I wouldn't say I felt like I was living and breathing Philadelphia when I was in there, and I kept waiting for a reference to cheesesteaks, and I did not get one, which makes me wonder if that's a more modern phenomenon. But it was nice to spend some time in Philadelphia fictionally. I've been there several times, in my life, and it is a cool city, even though I don't know a lot about it. I just think it's a cool place. I saw a Salvador Dali exhibition there at one of their main art museums, and that was just an amazing show. But I'm getting off the point. I liked the Philadelphia setting. So let me tell you a little bit about the plot of this book. It starts out with one sort of straightforward case, and then it really takes an interesting left turn. It starts out with the owner of the department store, Eli Jonas, who is Carney's boss, saying to him, we're having a theft problem, and the theft is coming from within. So can you help me get to the bottom of it? And Carney traces, with the help of a couple of guys that freelance for him, traces what's going on to sort of the perfume department, where stock is going missing. And that was interesting for me too, because I'm not like a big cologne, perfume, jewelry, fancy accoutrement kind of person. Like, look at me, I'm not really adorned. And so it's interesting to me that there are a lot of people in the world, male and female, who adorn themselves with jewelry and cosmetics and, other types of accoutrement. And, some of these perfumes and colognes sell for astronomical prices. I would never in a million years pay that kind of money for a scent. But it's a thing, right? There are people who will, pay, $5,000 for a bottle of perfume that's this big. And it also put me in mind of the novel Perfume by Patrick Suskind, or Suskind. And if you have not read that, please do. It's fabulous. It is a great book. So it was kind of interesting to learn a little bit about perfuming and how perfumes are made and sold, and the importance of packaging. I mean, I guess we all know these things, right? That probably that $5,000 bottle of perfume, the price is as much in being able to show people your pretty little bottle as it is in the scent. And I noticed the same thing recently. I was in a liquor store a couple weekends ago, and I noticed the beautiful packaging in liquor and alcohol. Really, like incredible design work going on in alcohol. Not that I'm some big drinker. I do like a cocktail once in a while, but I just was marveling at the design of these wine bottles and wine labels and the hard liquor and the shapes of the bottles to draw the eye. It's just so cool. I'm, as you could probably tell, because I always focus on covers, I really am interested in design. And while we're on the topic of covers, this one, not so great, right? Not so great. It just looks like a bunch of sort of, I don't know, drugged up or semi-dead people crawling along the ground, but it's all the same person. It's not the greatest. It's not the greatest cover. But what happens is, as in the course of solving what's going on in the perfume department at this grand, successful department store, Carney gets asked by the owner's son, Jack, to help him with a separate private case. And that's where things get really interesting, because Eli's son, Jack, is married to a woman, Lida, who is a European refugee who survived concentration camps in World War II. And many of her friends and the friends of the family are people who suffered these incredible ordeals under the Nazis and the Russians in World War II. I mean, concentration camps and being chased by dogs and hunted like animals. I mean, I wouldn't say history has forgotten that, but it's kind of easy to forget the atrocities of World War II if we're not reminded of them occasionally. And this book really reminded me of that and what people went through and how good we have it today in comparison. But what Lita and Jack do in their kind of estate in the Philadelphia suburbs is they run a nonprofit organization called Future Americans. And what they try to do is get, people who have been beaten up and made poverty stricken and lost everything in World War II, teach them English, get them to the United States, give them jobs, temporary jobs where they will learn English and learn American culture with the goal of officially someday sort of assimilating and being able to take care of themselves in a country where there is some upward mobility or there's some opportunity, not just trying to rebuild themselves in wartime, post-war Europe. And that's an interesting setup. What happens is records are stolen from the files of this organization, Future Americans, and they want Carney to get to the bottom of it, because these records have very sensitive, very detailed information about people that you probably wouldn't want known, right? I mean, I guess it's almost like early worry about identity theft, the way we all worry about that these days. This kind of seems like the equivalent in the 1950s. And as a result of his investigations, Carney has to sort of look into what's going on with a lot of the people who are associated with Future Americans and what their jobs are, what their goals are. And here's where we get to what I mentioned earlier as a really modern theme is immigration and illegal immigration. So you can tell pretty early on that Future Americans is in the business of helping people come to this country illegally, meaning, without papers, without proper authorization, and so forth. And it's immigration is just, I'm not telling you anything you don't already know. The size of this issue in the world today, it's almost overwhelming, right? In America, it is incredibly divisive, but not just here, right? In Europe, in Asia, in pretty much every region of the world, immigration is a concern, and there's a lot of discussion about it, for better or for worse or for neutral or whatever. And this book made me realize that even though it feels like we hear so much about immigration now, that it's been a topic of conversation and social concern and social awareness for a very long time. And it brings up interesting questions like, who deserves to be allowed into the country? What should be done if people are brought to this country for all the right reasons, but not legally? And all of this sort of plays into the plot. And so it kind of shows that everything old is new again. And I haven't read a lot of books with this type of plot. And that was really what I found the most interesting about the book. The investigation itself and some of the things that happen are kind of out of the Mystery 101 playbook. There are some surprises, of course, the investigator, some guy shows up with a gun and threatens him and says to him, stop sticking your nose where it doesn't belong, right? That's been done 1,000 times. And, another body drops in the middle of the book. That's very common. But I thought it was interesting the way this book started out with, kind of the American institution of a department store, and then took this really wild turn into post-World War II refugees, in this country and the situation that they faced. So, and like I said, that's where the title "The Golden Door" comes from, because of the poem on the Statue of Liberty. I lift my lamp beside the golden door. And it's interesting. There's some discussion of the poem itself in here, where you may remember the line, "Send me your tired, your poor, your wretched refuse yearning to breathe free." And some of the characters in this book say, we kind of resent being referred to as wretched refuse, right? We don't think of ourselves as refuse, as garbage, right? We're looking for a better life, but, to welcome us by calling us wretched refuse maybe is not the nicest thing possible. And, I thought about that. My grandparents came through Ellis Island. They, from Italy. They were not wretched refuse. I mean, they were not well-heeled. They were not, wealthy, but I don't think they thought of themselves as wretched garbage. So that was just kind of an interesting little, look into American history there, and the great, Statue of Liberty standing there in New York Harbor. So the writing is competent, with a couple of moments of sublime writing. There's a scene where Carney just returns home to his apartment, and he describes it in such a way that you can tell it's his home, right? It's not fancy. It's just kind of this comfortable bachelor pad, but you really feel like, oh, this is his home, and he loves it, and this is where he's comfortable, and this is where he unwinds. There was a nice feeling about that. And I like the way Carney is always referring to Philadelphia as my city. He feels like he is part of Philadelphia, and Philadelphia is part of him. And that's nice too, because, we all know so many city people who have that close connection with the city that they live in. I mean, I live in the suburbs, and I would say people feel connected to the towns that they live in. But there's something special about that urban connection, I think, between a city dweller and their city of choice. And you see that here. The thing that I mentioned before, I just didn't really care for, was how confrontational Carney could be, for no good reason, when there are better ways to get the information. But again, I chalk that up to being, immature as a person, and the writer not having fully developed his craft, as we hope he would for later books. I think there were a total of maybe 6 in the Carney Wilde series. I also like that Carney is, he hires these freelance guys to help him, and he's protective of them and likes them and tries to treat them well and wants to hire them as full-time operatives in his burgeoning business. So he's good to the people around him. Of course, there's a bit of a love interest. Not particularly interesting. It's the woman who runs the perfume department at the department store, Miss Boone, who goes by the nickname Daniel, short for Daniel, because she doesn't like her real name, which is Hermione. But as in so many of these books from this era, I'm really realizing how tacked on these romances feel. Almost like it was a checkbox that had to be fulfilled in your list of what do I do when I write a novel? I must give my protagonist a love interest. And often they're sort of instantaneous relationships and, and that kind of happens here. But, just a trope of the genre, right? I mean, it's okay. Not being a romantic, I kind of have a hard time swallowing these insta relationships. But like I said, they're part of reading mysteries, and, I guess they do happen. I know people who fall in love at the drop of a hat. So that's what I've got for you tonight. I've got The Golden Door by Bart Spicer. Interesting sort of entry in the PI, the PI genre. Maybe not enough to have helped Spicer stand the test of time for plots or characters, but certainly a pleasant enough read. And I should also mention, I liked, for some bizarre reason, this is me, I liked the department store setting. And I don't really know why. I guess because maybe they remind me of my childhood or my teenagehood, where, there was a cachet about these department stores where you could really go in to these departments and get anything you were looking for. And it was like the whole world was in the walls of this enormous building with all these different departments. And I don't know, I guess I just felt like, they had their own culture and their own way of doing things. I mean, certainly the fancy department stores these days, hope to create or propagate that cachet, Nordstrom or Bloomingdale's or maybe even Gump's in San Francisco. What's the big one in Chicago? Marshall Field's. I don't even know if it's still open. But there was something a little special about them back in the day, probably the 50s through the 80s. And, now I think they're really having a hard time because of the internet and, online everything. But it was nice to be kind of brought back to those days of, elegant women and well-dressed men working behind counters and, giving you one-to-one service and being able to talk to people and, not having to chat because you need help or, not being able to get anybody to help you because the company don't want to spend any money on customer service. So to throw back to a different era, and that's what I like about so much about reading these older mysteries, is that feeling of being thrown back to a time that just, it has many contrasts to today. We're not saying it's better or that it's worse, but that it's interesting to compare and contrast against today. So I'm looking at this video and I'm seeing that it's now 28 minutes. I didn't mean to babble on for such a long time over a book that doesn't really have a lot of chutzpah or a lot of depth, but there you have it. That's me. That's the channel, so maybe you made it this far and maybe you didn't. If you did, thank you. If you didn't, I don't blame you. And I will be back next time with another mystery for you. Good night.